This is the complete legal history of Earthship Biotecture, spanning 5 decades of one architect's war against building codes, zoning laws, and a regulatory system that nearly destroyed him before ultimately bending to his vision. Earthships are some of the most radical, self-sustaining, essentially net-zero homes on the planet, but for decades, building one was practically illegal. In this guide, we trace the entire legal and philosophical history of Earthship Biotecture, from Michael Reynolds' first beer can homes in the New Mexico desert to the groundbreaking legislation that finally legitimized off-grid living. If you're planning to build anything outside the conventional box, whether that's an earthship, a cob house, or any alternative structure, this story becomes your blueprint for understanding how the legal system fights back and how one man proved it could be beaten. It starts in 1969. Michael Reynolds, the architect behind Earthship Biotecture, graduates from the University of Cincinnati with a degree in architecture and heads straight to Taos, New Mexico. One evening in April 1970, he's watching TV when CBS preempts Hawaii 5-0 to air a special on the first Earth Day, hosted by Walter Cronkite. Cameras sweep across pollution-choked power plants, trash-clogged streams, cans tossed from passing cars. Reynolds sees something nobody else in architecture is seeing. He sees building materials. By 1972, he constructs his first experimental structure, the Thumb House, made from beer cans. He spends the next 14 years refining prototypes, developing what would become the Earthship, a passive solar home built from recycled tires using rammed earth tire construction, cans, and bottles. Self-heating, self-cooling, with off-grid water collection and grey-water recycling systems, designed so that a person with no specialized construction skills could build one. In 1986, he formalizes the operation and founds Earthship Biotecture. His work would later be featured in the documentary Garbage Warrior. Now, here's where it gets legally interesting and where it all starts to unravel. In 1989, Reynolds purchases 55 acres of raw mountainside 12 miles north of Taos. The grade runs so steep his bulldozer operators keep quitting, so he uses solar-powered jackhammers to carve out building sites at 8,500 feet. He calls the development REACH, Rural Earthship Alternative Community Habitat. Then, in 1993, comes STAR, Social Transformation Alternative Republic, on 1,100 acres. And in 1994, his most ambitious project, the Greater World Earthship Community, on 630 acres, fronting 2 miles of Highway 64. Reynolds structures these communities in a way he believes sidesteps subdivision codes. Homebuyers don't own the land under their houses. Instead, they purchase memberships in a land users association with prices tied to square footage. Reynolds writes in a 1992 flyer, "This is not a real estate investment, and land is not being sold for profit." But county officials see it differently. By 1990, Reynolds has already surrendered his New Mexico architecture license after a year-long dispute with several clients. He keeps his general contractor's license and employs other licensed architects to stamp his blueprints. He remains licensed in Colorado and Arizona. The loss slows nothing down. Then comes 1996. The new Taos County Planning Director, Dave DeChico, declares all 3 communities illegal subdivisions. His statement is blunt. As far as we're concerned, Mr. Reynolds has created 3 illegal subdivisions. He's violated the New Mexico Subdivision Act, the Taos Land Use Regulations, and the Uniform Building Code, now replaced by the International Building Code. In 1997, stop work orders hit all 3 developments. An injunction halts construction. Roughly 50 homes are affected. People are living in half-built structures with no legal path to finish them. Think about that for a moment if you're researching alternative building permits by state. 50 families, money invested, homes partially constructed, and the government says, stop. That's the reality of building outside code. Reynolds and a group of homeowners sue Taos County, arguing these communities aren't subdivisions since Reynolds owns the land and residents don't use public utilities. The legal standoff drags on for a year. Meanwhile, frustrated residents start talking to reporters. REACH Earthship owner Joey Townsend tells the press she regrets the development was never reviewed by the county. She has no road access, just a gully. She's already replaced her truck's transmission trying to reach her own home. Subdivision regulations might have protected people like me, she says. And this is the part of the story that gets uncomfortable but is critical to understand. Not all the opposition to Reynolds came from bureaucrats protecting turf. Some of it came from his own customers. In 1998, Earthship owner Suzanne Martin sues Reynolds, alleging violations of New Mexico's Unfair Trade Practices Act and breach of contract. Her attorney, Lorenzo Atencio, describes the construction as shoddy. Leaking roofs, a water storage system that didn't work properly, exposed unsightly wiring, solar composting toilets that simply failed. A judge rules in Martin's favor in 2003. There's also the melting typewriter. In one early two-story design, the window angles created such extreme heat that an owner's heritage typewriter literally melted into a pool of plastic. Running sewage through a living room, as some designs called for, proved costly when things went wrong. In 2000, the New Mexico Board of Examiners for Architects files formal charges against Reynolds. He agrees to formally relinquish his license. For the second time, the state has stripped his credentials. But here's what makes Reynolds different from most people who lose fights with regulators. He doesn't quit. He pivots. In March 2004, the Taos County Commission finally allows Greater World to resume development, but with strict conditions. Private ownership of individual lots, uniform roads, standardized house plans. Reynolds later says he lost the freedom to fail, the ability to experiment that had driven his work since 1972. Greater World becomes, effectively, a conventional subdivision with unconventional houses. Reynolds recognizes that winning inside the existing system isn't enough. He needs to change the system itself. He launches a 3-year lobbying campaign in the New Mexico state legislature. His argument is brilliant and distinctly New Mexican. He invokes Trinity Site, where in July 1945 the U.S. government detonated an experimental, unproven nuclear device in the desert. If the state could authorize a testing ground for nuclear weapons, surely it could authorize a testing ground for sustainable housing. In March 2007, House Bill 269, the Sustainable Development Testing Site Act, gets signed into law. It authorizes Reynolds to develop Earthships as experimental test sites without interference from conventional building codes on a designated 2-acre plot called EVE, Earthship Village Ecologies. That same year, after a 17-year battle, his architect's license gets reinstated. Reynolds puts it this way: "I was the ugly duckling for 50 years. I was ridiculed. They took my license and damn near put me in jail. And then they start realizing that what we're doing is relevant to where the world is heading. And now we're turning into a swan. So where does this leave you today? Currently, you can obtain permits to build an Earthship in New Mexico, Pennsylvania, Wyoming, Nevada, Colorado, Florida, and Virginia, making these the most Earthship-friendly states. Virginia passed Green Development Zone legislation in 2017, allowing localities to establish zones with regulatory flexibility. North Carolina is updating its building codes in 2026 to integrate alternative housing methods. But outside of these specific jurisdictions and carve-outs, the path remains unclear. Reynolds himself has said something about building codes that should be tattooed on the wall of every alternative builder's workshop. The building codes were introduced long ago to protect people, and I think that was a good thing. But like so many things, their protection has grown to be a choking situation. We're being choked with our own protection, and it is keeping us from evolving. The lesson from this 50-year legal saga isn't that codes are your enemy. Joey Townsend's Gully Road and Suzanne Martin's leaking roof prove that some protections matter. The lesson is that the regulatory system was never designed for innovation. It was designed for repetition. And if you want to build differently, you need to understand that system deeply enough to either work within it or change it entirely. Reynolds did both, and it cost him 17 years and his professional license twice. Today, Earthships have been built in over 38 countries. The Earthship Academy has trained more than 5,000 students. MoMA exhibited his work. Greater World is the largest approved sustainable subdivision in the world. The regulatory rebels won, but only because they learned the rules well enough to rewrite them. And Earthship Biotecture continues to push the boundaries of what's possible in sustainable, off-grid living.